I've been with ACSI since almost the beginning, 1998. I came to ACSI out of graduate work and my experience at the U of M Business School, which is where the index was founded by Klaus Fornell back in 1994, and where we operated really up until about 8 years ago. The methods with which we've collected data over the years have changed radically. If you go back to the very beginning, in the early 90s, everything was telephone interviewing then. The internet was in its infancy, certainly was not a viable method of collecting data. Everything was done with landline telephone surveys, usually catching people around dinner time or on weekends, and surveying them for the various products and services that ACSI measures at those times, different times of the day. That became less and less feasible, particularly in recent years. We've seen now upwards of half of U.S. households ditching their landline phones. More and more consumers are going to cell phones only, and that becomes very problematic. We found that the population we were reaching on landline phones was becoming an older and more female population, and as a result, you start to get increasingly skewed results. Cell phones become a big challenge for surveying. You have a lot of non-response bias with cell phones because a lot of folks just don't want to answer their cell phone, or you're taking their minutes and they are paying for minutes and so on. So they don't want to answer on cell phones while they're at a ball game or they're at the bar or wherever they might happen to be. So huge issues there. Luckily, the advent of a lot of new technologies, particularly the internet, has allowed us to pivot, as many market research firms have done, into collecting all of our data online. Beginning in 2010, we began to make that shift, and we are now 100% collecting all of the ACSI data via email invitations to panelists who agree to do surveying online, who come to our own technology platform and take the survey that way. In terms of the number of people that we're able to survey, we actually can reach a lot larger population now. The proportion of surveys that are accepted and taken online versus those that are declined compared to when you would call consumers on the phone is actually much larger. And so that's a good thing. We're able to reach many more consumers and do so much more cost effectively. Secondly, in terms of the quality of the data, it's very interesting. We did some studies at the time that we were looking at shifting from phone to internet, where we were still doing a lot of surveying on the phone and a lot of surveying on the internet. We could compare those results, and we were finding virtually no differences in the data that we were collecting online versus what we were collecting by phone. And that's interesting because if you think about some of the kinds of surveying that's done, particularly things like political surveying, you can get a lot of bias by doing online surveying. But the passion, the emotion is largely absent about various products and services. It really doesn't make a whole lot of difference if you're asking people about how satisfied they are with their toothpaste, or how satisfied they are with their running shoe, or the car they bought in an email survey or an online survey versus talking to them on the phone. Right now, ACSI is targeting about 200 interviews per company or per brand that we measure, and that's a very good statistically significant sample size that allows us to compare scores between two companies, or compare one company's score in year 1 versus year 2 very meaningfully, with margins of error of no more than plus or minus 3 points, which is pretty much a standard margin of error in any kind of survey. Right now, because we've expanded the number of industries we measure, expanded the number of companies that we measure, and expanded the frequency with which we measure, we're now actually looking at surveys of customers for each company quarterly rather than just on an annual basis. So we're looking at roughly 300,000 discrete pieces of data across the entire ACSI in a given year. I think that companies put a lot of trust in ACSI because of our longevity, and specifically the longevity of our methodology and our survey approach. While we have shifted from a phone methodology, of course, to an online methodology, the surveys themselves have stayed the same, and they've been remarkably consistent over time. There are many market researchers that change up their survey methodology every few years, sometimes even every year. Companies that are looking at their current data and then looking at their trend data going back even as far as 1995 can trust that the scores they're seeing in that 1995 data is based on the exact same survey questions that we're asking now. So there's that remarkable consistency across nearly 25 years that I think companies put a lot of stock in.